Welcome back, everyone. Let's dive right in. We're tackling the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. Now, we're dealing with a text that's not exactly, shall we say, light reading.
It's not your average bedtime story. Published in 1616 and jam-packed with symbolism. Think alchemy, spirituality, a dash of the esoteric. It's a recipe for a fascinating deep dive.
You can say that again. So our narrator, Christian Rosenkreutz, he gets this wedding invitation. But it's not your typical you're invited to a party kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely not. This invitation, it arrives during this wild, almost apocalyptic storm. You know, the kind that makes you think the world's about to end.
Yeah, I get the picture.
And then in the midst of all this chaos, a woman appears.
Talk about an entrance.
And she's not just any woman. She's described as fair and glorious, dressed in these sky-colored robes, even has wings covered in eyes. It's like something out of a vision.
Okay, so we've got the storm. We've got this mysterious, almost heavenly woman showing up. What's the significance?
Well, she delivers a poem. Cryptic, of course, as these things tend to be. And a letter for Rosenkreutz, sealed with a symbol. And this is interesting. He notes that the symbol would be, and I quote, little acceptable and much less useful to the devil.
Hold on. So right off the bat, we've got this hint of good versus evil.
It's definitely setting the stage for some kind of spiritual showdown. And remember, this was written during a time of immense religious and political turmoil. So the idea of hidden forces, secret societies, the battle between light and darkness, it would have resonated deeply with readers.
It makes you think about how these themes still resonate today. I mean, we're still drawn to stories about good versus evil, about uncovering hidden truths.
Absolutely. But getting back to Rosenkreutz, he follows the instructions in this mysterious invitation, and he ends up stumbling into what's described as an allegorical dungeon.
Uh-oh, that doesn't sound promising. What exactly is an allegorical dungeon?
Right. Well, picture this. It's dark, it's crowded, and there are all these people chained together, desperately trying to reach this cord that's being lowered from a hole above. It's a pretty bleak picture.
It sounds claustrophobic, almost suffocating.
That's the idea. It's about feeling trapped, both literally and figuratively. And here's the thing. Not everyone makes it onto that cord. Some are left behind in the darkness.
So it's not just about escaping this physical dungeon, it's about something more.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the path to enlightenment, to spiritual freedom, it's not always easy, and it's definitely not a guaranteed happy ending. But then, just when you think things can't get any weirder, Rosenkreutz finds himself at this incredibly lavish wedding feast. It's like going from a horror movie to a royal banquet.
Talk about a change of scenery. So we go from a dark dungeon to a feast. What's the deal with this wedding feast?
Well, it's opulent, it's over the top. There are emperors and kings, artists, all these important people. But there's a sense of unease that underlies all this extravagance. People are boasting, they're trying to impress each other.
It sounds a lot like our modern-day obsession with status and achievement. Maybe some things never change.
It's timeless, isn't it? But then, in the middle of all this noise and commotion, something really interesting happens. Music starts playing.
Music. Like a band strikes up.
Not just any music. It's described as this otherworldly music, so powerful that it silences everyone in the room. It's like a divine intervention, a cosmic tap on the shoulder, you know.
It's like the text is saying, okay, enough with the distractions. It's time to pay attention.
And that's the thing about this text. It keeps you on your toes. Just when you think you're getting a handle on the symbolism, it throws something else at you.
Well, you certainly have that right. That music, it really makes you think, doesn't it? About those moments when we're forced to stop and confront something bigger than ourselves.
Like a wake-up call, isn't it? And speaking of wake-up calls, the next part of this chemical wedding, it's where things get really interesting. We're talking about the weighing ceremony.
Okay, so set the scene for us. What's happening in the ceremony and what makes it so significant?
Well, imagine this. The music fades, the festive atmosphere from before, it's gone. There's this sense of anticipation in the air, a heaviness. And then, one by one, the guests are called forth to be weighed.
Weighed. Literally. Like on a scale.
That's the image the text uses. But it's clearly symbolic. We're not talking about physical weight here. It's about something much deeper. It's about measuring worthiness.
Worthiness. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Worthy of what? And who's doing the judging?
That's the thing. The text never explicitly states it. It's like this unspoken question hanging over everything. But it's clear that there are consequences. Some guests, they're drawn upwards when they're weighed as if found worthy. Others are pulled down, held back.
It's like this cosmic sorting hat, deciding who makes the cut and who doesn't. So what determines who goes up and who goes down? Is it about Good deeds, piety, what's the criteria?
And that's what makes the text so fascinating. It doesn't give us a simple answer. We see emperors and kings deemed too light, while seemingly ordinary individuals are lifted up. It's as if their true character, their inner qualities, are being weighed against the roles they play in the world.
That's a pretty humbling thought, isn't it? That our titles and achievements might mean very little in this grand scheme, so it's not about worldly success.
Not necessarily. And here's where the alchemical aspect comes into play. Remember, alchemy's all about transformation. It's not just about judging worth, but about the potential for change, for purification.
Okay, so even those who are found wanting, they're not necessarily condemned. There's hope for them to, I don't know, tip the scales in their favor, so to speak.
Exactly, and you see this reflected in the text. Some of those who don't pass this weighing, they're led away for these very specific punishments, almost as if each punishment is tailored to their individual failings. It's like these trials are actually opportunities for growth disguised as something more,
Yeah.
well, more unpleasant.
It's like that idea that sometimes our greatest challenges, they lead to our greatest transformations. So where does our narrator, Christian Rosenkreutz, fit into all of this? How does he handle this weighing ceremony?
Well, if you recall, Rosenkreutz, he's plagued by self-doubt throughout the story. He's convinced he's not worthy to even be present at this chemical wedding, let alone participate in this weighing ceremony.
He seems to be his own harshest critic, that's for sure.
And yet, despite his doubts, despite three men literally trying to hold him down, he's drawn upwards by the scale, as if something or someone recognizes a potential within him that he can't even see in himself.
It's like that moment when you finally start to believe in yourself, even if it takes someone else believing in you first.
In this act of being weighed, it seems to awaken something in him, because afterward he's given a chance to show compassion. He's given the opportunity to free a captive.
Oh, who does he choose?
He chooses to free an emperor, someone he had seen earlier, someone he felt sorry for. It's a small act, but it speaks volumes.
It's like he's taking the lessons of the weighing ceremony to heart. It's not just about being deemed worthy, but about acting with compassion, with understanding. But this being the chemical wedding, I have a feeling the story doesn't end there, does it?
You know this story better than you think. Just when we think we're starting to understand the rules of the game, the narrative shifts again. Rosenkreutz and the other guests who passed the weighing, they're led to this garden of judgment.
A garden? That sounds pleasant. A bit of a change of pace from dungeons and weighing ceremonies, right?
Well, the name might sound idyllic, but this garden, it's not exactly a place of peace and tranquility, because it's here, in this garden, that those who failed the weighing ceremony face the consequences of, well, let's call them unbalanced actions.
Okay, so not so idyllic after all. What are we talking about here? What kind of punishments are we talking about?
And here again, we see the text's emphasis on individual experience. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to judgment. The punishments are as varied as the guests themselves. Some are imprisoned, some are blinded, others are forced to carry heavy burdens.
It's like each punishment is tailored to the specific flaw that was revealed during the weighing. But, maybe it's not really about punishment, is it?
What do you mean?
Well, maybe it's more about rectification. Like each
Yeah.
trial is an opportunity to confront those flaws, to work towards some kind of inner balance. It's about transformation, not just retribution.
It's a fascinating way to look at it, isn't it? Turning suffering into an opportunity for growth. But I can sense a but coming.
Well, we can't forget about our narrator, can we? He survived the dungeon, he passed the weighing, he even showed compassion. But this is the chemical wedding, and something tells me he's not quite out of the woods yet. So we've got Rosenkreutz facing down some pretty intense symbolism, a garden designed for judgment. It makes you wonder, what would our personal garden look like, right? But before we get too introspective, let's not forget he's also on his way to this Tower of Olympus.
And it's quite the journey. Imagine this. Rosenkreutz, along with these other guests, they're sailing across a lake in ships, each ship adorned with all these symbolic figures. But the mood is far from celebratory.
So less pleasure cruise and more ship of the damned.
That's one way to put it. The text even mentions this song, sung by nymphs as they sail. But it's not a happy tune, more like a lament for those who were beheaded earlier in the story.
Ah, right, the 6 royal persons. It's almost like their symbolic deaths are somehow connected to this journey towards the tower. Like one stage of the process isn't complete until the next one begins.
That's an interesting thought. And it plays into that whole alchemical idea of death and rebirth, that something has to end for something new to begin. So they reach this Tower of Olympus, And I'm guessing it's not exactly what you'd expect from a place with that name.
You mean it's not all gods and goddesses lounging around on clouds?
Not quite. It's described as this place of intense labor, with multiple levels, all these rooms dedicated to grinding, distilling, extracting essences from plants and precious stones.
Sounds more like a medieval chemistry lab than a mythical palace.
Exactly. And that's important because it highlights this central idea of alchemy. It's not just about passive contemplation. It's about getting your hands dirty, engaging with the material world in order to affect spiritual change. It's like, no pain, no gain, but for the soul.
And speaking of gaining spiritual insights, there's that inscription Rosenkreutz stumbles upon, the one that reads, "When the fruit of my tree shall be quite melted down, then I shall awake and be the mother of a king."
Oh, that's a perfect example of how this text operates. So much symbolism packed into a single sentence. You could spend hours unpacking all the layers of meaning there.
Well, let's give it a shot. What do you make of it? We've got fruit, trees, melting, a king.
It's like a riddle wrapped in an enigma, drenched in alchemical imagery. But at its core, I think it speaks to the transformative process itself. The tree, probably representing the tree of life, it offers its fruit this symbol of potential, of enlightenment. But that fruit needs to be broken down, melted down, before its true essence can be released, giving birth to something new, the king, the perfected self.
Okay, so it's not enough to just recognize the potential for transformation. We have to actively engage with it, break it down, and then, I guess, reforge ourselves anew.
Exactly. And it's a process, not a one-time event. It takes time, effort, a willingness to surrender to the process itself. But of course, we can't talk about alchemy without mentioning the philosophic egg.
Ah, yes. The pinnacle of alchemical achievement, right?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly one of the most enduring symbols. And in this context, the philosophic egg, it's created through this elaborate alchemical process and eventually hatches into a black bird.
A black bird. Honestly, I was expecting something a bit more majestic.
But again, transformation isn't always pretty. And this bird, it's not just any bird. It undergoes these incredible metamorphoses. Its feathers changing from black to white to multicolored as it's fed different substances.
Okay, now we're talking. So the colors, they represent different stages of transformation, different levels of spiritual purification.
Precisely. It's like a visual representation of the soul's journey towards enlightenment. But, and this is where it gets a little frustrating for our narrator, Rosenkreutz is actually barred from entering the seventh room of the tower. He's deemed too lazy to participate in the final ceremony.
No, after all he's been through. Talk about adding insult to injury. So what happens in this mysterious seventh room?
We only get these tantalizing glimpses, unfortunately. But it sounds like the other initiates are working with gold, enveloped in this mysterious mist, and creating these beautiful humanoid figures from the ashes of that black bird we were just talking about.
It's like witnessing this incredible alchemical ballet, but from behind a curtain. You catch glimpses of beauty, of movement, but you don't get to see the whole picture.
And that's how the text ends, with Rosenkreutz being abruptly transported back home, missing out on the culmination of the entire chemical wedding. It's quite the cliffhanger.
You know, it's almost as if the author is saying, this is the journey, folks, but you have to walk the path yourself. What a wild ride. We've gone from cryptic invitations and allegorical dungeons to weighing ceremonies and color-changing birds. I think it's safe to say this chemical wedding, it's more than just a story. It's an invitation to explore our own capacity for transformation. So listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this question. What resonated with you the most? What would your path through that symbolic castle look like? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of the chemical wedding alive in your own life.